Hi everybody, it's Anna with your second lecture. So I am doing the same thing that I did last time. After I said hi here, I'm going to move myself to the side so that I'm not in the way for you to see the notes. Okay, so last week you learned about the scientific method and what science is. And one of the things that you learned is that science is a body of knowledge that's accumulated with the scientific method. And you also learned that we don't prove in science. But when we do have a body of knowledge, we want to be pretty certain that the knowledge is correct. So, for example, it wouldn't be much sense to put together a textbook if we're not pretty sure about the information that's in there. And it would be hard to have an expert if we're not sure that the expert knows the science or the facts and so on. So, even though we do not prove in science because of some of the things that we discussed, like bias or new technology and so on, we do create something that's called a scientific theory for a strongly supported hypothesis. So, if we have a hypothesis that has been tested multiple times by multiple different scientists to weed out bias, and that hypothesis is supported by multiple lines of evidence, and that hypothesis has always been supported and never been falsified, then it becomes a kind of hypothesis that's extremely unlikely to be falsified or rejected in the future due to the already accumulated evidence. So when we have all four of those things, multiple lines of evidence, tested by multiple people, always been supported, never been falsified, and extremely unlikely to be falsified in the future, then we call it a scientific theory. And that is the scientist's best version of the truth. Now, it's really important to point out that the meaning of the word theory has changed over time. Like a theory, like 200 years ago used to be something really well supported. We don't think of that a theory in everyday language like that anymore. So a scientific theory is something that I just explained is extremely well supported. In everyday life, the word theory has almost the opposite meaning, where it's a good idea but it's not realized. Like, theoretically, I should exercise more, but what I'm really saying is it's kind of doubtful, like it's a good idea, but definitely not realized. Like, I'm not exercising enough when I say something like that. So it's important to not get caught up in how you use the word theory in everyday language and in everyday life versus a scientific theory, and realize that those are almost opposite meanings. Now, I want to introduce you to your first scientific theory, and that's the scientific theory of the unity of life. And what that theory says is that all life is related, and that all life originated from a universal ancestor. So on the slide here, you can see I have the tree of life, and here's that universal ancestor. And that universal ancestor of life showed up some 3.8 billion years ago, or 3,800 million years ago, so a really, really long time ago. And there are three branches on the tree of life, and we call them the three domains. There's the bacteria, the archaea, I'll talk about them in a minute, and you will read about them in a minute, and the eukaryotes. So you're familiar with bacteria because, bacteria make us sick, and probably everybody's had a bacterial infection at some point in their life where the doctor prescribed antibiotics. The archaea are what we call extremophiles. That means extreme, you know what that means, and phile means loving. So these are organisms that are found or love to live in the most extreme environments on Earth. And they were only discovered in the 1980s. So, that seems kind of like a long time ago, but as far as the history of science goes, that's about 40 years ago, so that's not all that long ago. Okay. And then there's the eukaryotes, and plants, animals, and humans are included with the animals. Fungi, which are the molds and mushrooms, and protists, which are mostly single-celled eukaryotes, are all included in the eukaryotes. And so this 3-domain tree of life replaces the old 5 kingdoms, which used to be the bacteria and then these guys. So you can see when the archaea were discovered, the tree of life actually changed. The basic idea that all life is related and goes back to a universal ancestor did not change, just the shape of the tree of life. But it's a good example of why we don't prove in science, because here, 40 years ago, we had to make a pretty major adjustment by adding this entire branch that we had not yet discovered. And the reason it took so long to discover the archaea was that they do live in such extreme environments. They live in the hotlands in Yellowstone Park, where they're extremely hot, extremely acidic, extremely mineral toxic. So people just assumed that life couldn't exist there. And it was only in the 1980s that people actually discovered that, oh, wow, life actually does exist there. So this is a tree of life, and I told you it is a scientific theory. Let's go back here. The tree of life belongs to that scientific theory of the unity of life, that all life is related and originated from a universal ancestor. And so one of the things about the scientific theory is that it's supported by multiple lines of evidence. So in a second here, the video is going to be over, and in your reading, you're going to see 8 pieces of evidence that support this theory. So I want you to read through those, and then you have a couple of questions to answer. All right, that's my lecture for today, and I'll see you guys next week.